long before the world would come to know his name, before it would be carved into stone or whispered in moments of national memory. Abraham Lincoln existed quietly within a wide and unfinished land. The air around his early life was not filled with destiny, but with ordinary sounds. Wind through trees, the creak of wooden floors, the low murmur of voices at the end of a long day. He was born into a world still forming itself, where the edges of life were rough and certainty was rare. He arrived in the winter of 1809 in a small log cabin set among the hills of Kentucky. The cabin was simple, built of hand, cut timber with little more than necessity to shape it. Light entered through small openings, and darkness settled early in the evenings. Life there was shaped by seasons and labor, by the steady demands of survival. Abraham was the second child of Thomas and Nancy Lincoln, people who worked the land with their hands and trusted in quiet endurance more than ambition. From his earliest days, there was a sense of space around him, not emptiness, but room to think, room to notice. The forests stretched outward, dense and watchful, offering both shelter and uncertainty. The paths between settlements were narrow and slow. Words traveled carefully in such places, and silence was never far away. In this setting, Abraham learned to observe before he learned to speak much, and to listen before he learned to assert himself. His childhood was shaped less by formal instruction and more by rhythm. Chores done in the morning light, long afternoons spent helping his father clear land, cutting trees that seemed older than memory. Evenings gathered close to the hearth, where firelight softened the sharp edges of the day. Books were rare, but when they appeared, they were treated with a kind of reverence. A borrowed volume might be read and reread until its pages bent with familiarity, until its words felt almost like companions. Nancy Lincoln, his mother, carried a quiet strength that lingered in his memory long after she was gone. She taught him simple lessons, not only of letters, but of kindness and fairness. She spoke gently, but with intention, and her presence seemed to steady the small household. When Abraham later spoke of her, it was with a softness that suggested gratitude mingled with loss, though he rarely lingered on the feeling. Some experiences shape a person so deeply that they no longer require words. When Abraham was still a boy, the family moved again, crossing into Indiana, seeking land that might offer more stability. The journey itself was slow and uncertain, marked by muddy roads and nights spent beneath open skies. It was a movement not toward promise, but toward possibility. The cabin they built there stood among thick woods, and life resumed its familiar patterns. Yet change had already begun to work quietly within him. Loss came early. Nancy Lincoln fell ill and died when Abraham was only 9 years old. The world did not stop when she was gone. Work continued. Seasons turned. But something in him grew still in a different way. Grief did not announce itself loudly. It settled. It deepened his habit of inward thought, of turning experiences over silently, as if trying to understand how life could be both tender and unforgiving at once. For a time, the household felt unfinished. Then Thomas Lincoln remarried, bringing Sarah Bush Johnston into their lives. She brought warmth, order, and a sense of care that gradually filled the hollow spaces. She encouraged Abraham's curiosity, recognized his hunger for learning, and protected his quiet hours with books. In her presence, he found permission to be thoughtful in a world that often valued only strength of body. Formal schooling remained limited. A few months here, a few weeks there. But Abraham learned in other ways. He listened to conversations among adults. He absorbed the cadence of speech, the way stories were told. He learned how humor could soften hardship, how words could ease tension. He began to understand that language held power, not in loud declarations, but in steady clarity. Tall even as a young man, awkward in movement, he did not fit easily into the expectations around him. He worked hard, but his mind often wandered beyond the task at hand. While splitting rails or guiding a plow, he might be thinking about a sentence he had read, or a thought that lingered without resolution. He was not restless, exactly. He was reflective, carrying questions that did not demand immediate answers. As he grew older, the frontier continued to shape him. Towns were small. News arrived slowly. Injustice was not abstract. It was visible, woven into daily interactions, accepted by many as an unchangeable part of life. Abraham noticed these things quietly. He did not yet argue against them openly. He observed. He stored impressions. He let them settle alongside his own sense of fairness, which seemed less learned than instinctive. He read when he could. Law books, histories, the Bible, Shakespeare. Each offered something different. Structure, moral complexity, the weight of consequence. He did not rush through these texts. He lingered, turning phrases over, absorbing rhythm and meaning. Reading became both escape and grounding, a way to connect with thoughts larger than his immediate surroundings while remaining firmly rooted within them. In moments alone, he sometimes spoke aloud, testing words against the stillness. His voice, later so recognizable, was shaped in these quiet experiments. He learned how silence could carry meaning, how pauses could hold more than sound. These were not deliberate lessons. They emerged naturally, formed by long hours with few distractions. By the time he reached early adulthood, Abraham Lincoln was already a man of contrasts, strong yet gentle, reserved yet capable of warmth, humble in circumstance, yet expansive in thought. He did not imagine greatness. He imagined usefulness. He wanted to understand the world well enough to move within it honestly, without falsehood or unnecessary cruelty. Life remained uncertain. Paths were not clearly marked. But within him, a slow steadiness had taken root. shaped by labor, loss, observation, and thought. The boy from the log cabin carried forward not a sense of entitlement, but a deep familiarity with struggle and quiet perseverance. And as the days continued to unfold, he moved forward without urgency, trusting that meaning, like dawn, would arrive in its own time. As Abraham Lincoln moved further into adulthood, the world around him widened slowly, like a path extending through mist. He left his family home and took on work where he could find it, not driven by restlessness, but by a quiet sense that life required motion. The frontier offered few certainties, but it offered room. He worked as a farmhand, a ferryman, a rail splitter, and later as a clerk in a small general store. Each role brought him into contact with different rhythms of life, different voices, different ways people carried their burdens. The store, in particular, became a place of listening. People came not only to trade goods, but to talk. They spoke of debts and harvests, of small triumphs and lingering grievances. Abraham stood behind the counter, tall and patient, weighing flour or measuring cloth, while absorbing the tones beneath the words. He had an ability to make others feel unhurried, as though their concerns mattered simply because they existed. This was not strategy. It was temperament. He became known for his honesty, a reputation that grew without effort. If he made a mistake, he corrected it, even if it meant walking miles to return a few pennies. Such actions were remembered, passed along quietly, forming a kind of trust that settled around him. Yet he did not see himself as virtuous. He simply followed an inner alignment that made deceit feel uncomfortable, like ill-fitting clothes. During these years, his inner life continued to deepen. He thought often, sometimes to the point of melancholy, though he rarely showed it openly. There were moments when the weight of existence pressed down on him, when questions about purpose and suffering lingered without resolution. He carried these thoughts without complaint, allowing them to shape his understanding rather than overwhelm it. Humor became one way he balanced the heaviness, a gentle wit that surfaced unexpectedly, easing tension without dismissing it. He began to take an interest in law, not as an abstract system, but as a structure that attempted, however imperfectly, to hold society together. Law books found their way into his hands, and he studied them by lamplight, stretched out on the floor or sitting quietly after long days of work. He did not study with haste. He read slowly, carefully, as if each sentence deserved respect. He was teaching himself not just rules, but reasoning. At the same time, he entered the world of local politics almost by accident. Communities were small, and participation was informal. Someone suggested his name. Others agreed. He ran for the state legislature and lost the first time, a result that did not wound him deeply. Failure, to him, was information. It revealed something about timing, about readiness, about patience. He tried again later, with greater success, and found himself stepping into public life without ceremony. As a legislator in Illinois, he was not loud or dominating. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, his words were plain, unadorned, shaped by clarity rather than force. He did not seek conflict. He sought coherence. Even those who disagreed with him sensed his sincerity, a quality that softened opposition and made discussion possible. Yet beneath his measured exterior, uncertainty remained. He questioned himself often. He worried about adequacy, about whether his thoughts were truly useful or merely well-meaning. These doubts did not paralyze him. They kept him careful. They prevented arrogance. He understood that authority, once claimed too easily, could become brittle. His personal life unfolded alongside these developments, sometimes gently, sometimes with difficulty. He formed attachments slowly, cautiously. Love for him was not an easy certainty. It stirred both longing and fear, promising connection while threatening loss. When he eventually married Mary Todd, their union carried complexity. Mary was intelligent, articulate, and ambitious, qualities that both attracted and unsettled him. Their relationship would be marked by affection and strain, shared purpose and private tension. Marriage did not quiet his inner questioning. If anything, it deepened it. Responsibility expanded. The need to provide, to remain steady, pressed upon him. He continued practicing law, traveling from town to town, riding long distances across uneven roads. Courtrooms were modest spaces, often crowded and warm, where disputes reflected the texture of everyday life. He argued cases with logic and empathy, often seeking fairness over victory. On these journeys, solitude became familiar. Hours spent riding alone allowed thoughts to drift and settle. He reflected on human nature, on ambition, on the fragile balance between order and chaos. He saw how easily power could be misused, how quickly fear could harden into cruelty. These reflections did not turn him bitter. They made him cautious, deliberate, aware of complexity. Slavery, present and largely unquestioned in many circles, occupied his thoughts with increasing persistence. He did not approach the subject with fiery language. He approached it with moral unease. It conflicted with his sense of fairness, with the quiet lessons learned in childhood about dignity and worth. Yet he also understood the depth of division surrounding it, the way it was woven into economic and social structures. He held this tension carefully, refusing simple answers. As years passed, he gained recognition as a capable lawyer and a thoughtful public figure. Opportunities appeared, receded, and returned again. He experienced setbacks that tested his patience and successes that demanded humility. Through it all, his manner remained steady. He did not rush forward. He waited. He observed. He prepared without knowing exactly for what. There were evenings when he returned home exhausted, carrying not only physical fatigue, but the weight of unresolved questions. He might sit quietly, staring into the dim light, allowing thoughts to move through him without urgency. These moments were not empty. They were spaces of integration where experience slowly became understanding. In the unfolding of these ordinary days, something enduring was taking shape, not ambition sharpened by hunger for recognition, but purpose refined by reflection. He was becoming, without spectacle, a man capable of holding complexity without breaking, of moving forward while remaining grounded. And as time continued its patient work, he carried this steadiness with him, step by unhurried step, into whatever waited beyond the horizon. Time moved forward with a steady, almost unremarkable persistence, and Abraham Lincoln moved with it. His days filled with law practice, family life, and the gentle pull of public responsibility. Nothing announced itself as a turning point. There were no clear markers that separated what had been from what would come next. Instead, his life unfolded the way rivers do, guided by terrain, shaped by patience, widening almost without notice. As his reputation grew, so did the range of people who sought him out. Clients came with disputes over land, contracts, debts, and misunderstandings that had hardened over time. Abraham listened carefully, often longer than necessary, allowing people to speak until their urgency softened into clarity. He believed that many conflicts carried their own resolution if given enough space to breathe. In court, his arguments were simple and direct, grounded in reason rather than display. He spoke as if he trusted the listener to follow, and often they did. At home, life was less orderly. His marriage carried warmth and strain in equal measure. Mary's mind moved quickly, filled with ideas and expectations, shaped by a world more polished than the one Abraham had come from. She believed deeply in his potential, sometimes more forcefully than he believed in it himself. Their differences created friction, but also balance. Where he hesitated, she urged. Where she surged forward, he slowed the pace. They were not always at ease with one another, but they were bound by something enduring, something that allowed disagreement without abandonment. Children arrived, bringing noise, movement, and unpredictability into the household. Abraham found comfort in their presence, even as responsibility pressed more firmly upon him. He watched them play with a mixture of amusement and reflection, aware of how fragile and unformed life remained in its early years. Fatherhood did not make him lighter, but it made him more anchored, reminding him that choices extended beyond the self. The political landscape around him was shifting, though it did so unevenly. The country was growing, stretching westward, carrying with it unresolved questions about freedom, power, and belonging. These questions entered conversations quietly at first, then with greater insistence. Abraham listened to these discussions the same way. He listened to everything else, without haste, allowing contradictions to reveal themselves over time. When he spoke publicly about slavery, he did so carefully. His words were measured, not because he lacked conviction, but because he understood the weight of language. He believed that words could either build bridges or burn them, and he was unwilling to sacrifice understanding for applause. He spoke of slavery as a moral wrong, but also acknowledged the fears and complexities that surrounded it. This approach frustrated some and reassured others, leaving him in a space that was neither entirely comfortable nor entirely isolated. As the years passed, his involvement in politics deepened again, not out of desire for prominence, but out of a sense that silence carried its own consequences. He ran for office, stepped back, then stepped forward again. Each attempt brought lessons. Each loss sharpened his understanding. Each success reminded him of the limits of authority. He did not treat politics as a battlefield. He treated it as a conversation that had grown too loud, too fractured, and desperately in need of steadiness. One season brought him into public debates that drew larger audiences than he had known before. These exchanges were structured, formal, and widely attended. Yet Abraham approached them as he approached everything else, with calm attentiveness. He spoke slowly, allowing ideas to unfold without pressure. He trusted that clarity, if sustained long enough, would find its way through resistance. In these moments, his inner life remained present. He felt the strain of scrutiny, the vulnerability of exposure. He knew that every sentence carried risk, that misunderstanding could spread more quickly than truth. Yet he did not retreat. He stood with his thoughts, imperfect and evolving, believing that honesty required endurance. Despite the growing attention, his daily habits changed little. He still walked when he could, letting movement settle his thoughts. He still read at night, drawn to words that explored human nature and moral consequence. He still allowed humor to surface gently, offering relief without dismissal. Fame, such as it was, did not erase his sense of smallness within the larger sweep of events. There were moments of deep fatigue, when the weight of public expectation pressed heavily against his natural reserve. In these times, he withdrew inwardly, not to escape, but to regain balance. He understood that leadership, if it was to be useful, required renewal. He did not seek this renewal in grand gestures. He found it in quiet reflection, in the steady reassurance that one could continue without fully understanding the end. Gradually, others began to see in him something he himself only partially recognized: a capacity to hold opposing truths without collapse, a patience that did not weaken resolve, a seriousness that did not extinguish kindness. These qualities did not announce themselves. They emerged through consistency, through the slow accumulation of moments in which he chose care over certainty. As the nation edged closer to division, Abraham remained attentive rather than alarmed. He sensed the tension, the unease beneath ordinary conversations, the way fear traveled beneath confidence. He did not yet know the shape of what was coming. Few did. But he understood that whatever lay ahead would demand not force alone, but understanding, restraint, and an ability to speak to the quieter parts of the human spirit. In the evenings, when the house settled and the world outside grew still, he sometimes sat alone with his thoughts, aware of how much remained unresolved. These moments were not filled with dread. They were filled with a kind of sober acceptance. Life, he knew, rarely offered clear conclusions. It offered responsibility, again and again, asking only that one respond with integrity. And so he continued forward, carrying his doubts alongside his convictions, allowing time to shape him further. The path ahead remained indistinct, softened by distance and uncertainty, yet he moved toward it steadily, trusting that clarity would come not through force, but through patience, and that whatever role awaited him would reveal itself in its own quiet time. The years that followed carried Abraham Lincoln into a wider public awareness, though he himself remained much as he had always been. The outward circumstances shifted, but inwardly he continued to move at the same deliberate pace, guided by reflection rather than impulse. He had come to understand that visibility did not necessarily bring clarity, and that attention, once gathered, required careful stewardship. His debates and speeches drew increasing notice, not because they were fiery, but because they were grounded. People sensed that he was not performing belief, but living within it. He spoke from a place shaped by labor and loss, by observation rather than theory. His language was plain, yet beneath it ran a current of moral seriousness that listeners felt even when they could not fully name it. As national tensions deepened, political parties fractured and reformed. Loyalties shifted, old alliances weakened. The country seemed to be speaking in many voices at once, each certain of its own necessity. Abraham watched these changes with a steady gaze. He did not romanticize the past, nor did he rush to embrace the new. He understood that progress, when forced, could harden into resistance, and that change required time to be absorbed. When he joined the newly formed Republican Party, it was not an act of defiance, but of alignment. Its principles, as he understood them, resonated with his own sense of fairness and restraint. He did not imagine himself as a symbol. He imagined himself as a participant, one voice among many, offering what clarity he could. Campaigning was an unfamiliar rhythm. Crowds gathered, expectations formed. His words were repeated beyond their original context, shaped and reshaped by others. This unsettled him. He preferred conversations where listening mattered as much as speaking. Yet he accepted the necessity of public address, understanding that leadership often required presence, even when one longed for quiet. At home, the strain of public life made itself felt. Mary worried, urged, and sometimes despaired. The children sensed the weight that settled into the house, even when it went unspoken. Abraham tried to shield them from his own heaviness, offering stories, small jokes, moments of attention that reminded them of normalcy. He understood that private life required tending, even as public demands expanded. Loss visited again, this time with a sharper edge. The death of a child struck deeply, leaving a silence that no amount of reflection could fully soften. Grief did not move through him quickly. It settled and stayed, altering the shape of his inner world. He did not speak of it often. He carried it quietly, allowing it to deepen his compassion rather than close it. These personal sorrows shaped his public presence in subtle ways. He became more attuned to suffering, more cautious about judgment. He understood that pain did not announce itself clearly, that it often wore the mask of anger or fear. This understanding did not weaken his convictions. It made them more humane. As the possibility of national leadership emerged, it did so without triumph. Others spoke his name. Newspapers speculated. Support gathered gradually, unevenly. He did not campaign for greatness. He responded to inquiries, offered himself where invited, and remained otherwise steady. When asked about ambition, he often deflected, not out of false humility, but because ambition, as commonly understood, did not quite fit him. He knew his limitations. He knew his doubts. He also knew that leadership, if it came, would bring burdens he could not yet fully imagine. This knowledge did not deter him. It steadied him. He believed that responsibility, once accepted, required endurance more than confidence. The election that followed was tense, though Abraham experienced it at a distance. Results arrived slowly, carried by telegraph and word of mouth. When the outcome became clear, there was no outburst of celebration. There was instead a quiet recognition that something irrevocable had occurred. He had been chosen not by acclaim, but by circumstance, to step into a role shaped by division and uncertainty. The days after the election were marked by stillness. Friends and supporters visited. Letters arrived in abundance. Advice was offered freely, often urgently. Abraham listened, thanked, and reflected. He did not rush to speak. He did not announce intentions. He understood that silence, at times, was an act of respect toward complexity. As he prepared to leave Illinois for Washington, he visited familiar places, spoke with neighbors, and acknowledged the life he was stepping away from. There was no certainty that he would return unchanged. Perhaps no certainty that he would return at all. These thoughts passed through him without melodrama. He accepted them as part of the passage. In a farewell address to friends and townspeople, his voice carried a weight that surprised even him. He spoke of trust, of reliance on something beyond individual strength. His words were simple. but they carried the gravity of a man aware of his own limits. Those who listened felt the sincerity beneath the restraint. The journey east was long and watchful. Crowds gathered along the way, some curious, some hopeful, some wary. Abraham greeted them with the same calm presence he offered everywhere. He did not promise ease. He did not deny difficulty. He acknowledged uncertainty as honestly as he could. Arriving in the capital, he entered a world heavy with expectation and suspicion. The city itself felt unsettled, its streets filled with speculation and fear. States had begun to separate, pulling away from the fragile union that had held, imperfectly, for decades. The air carried the sense of something breaking, though no one could yet say how or where. In these early days, Abraham Lincoln moved carefully, aware that every action would be watched, every word weighed. He did not try to appear resolute beyond what he felt. He allowed his seriousness to show, his concern to be visible. He believed that honesty, even when unsettling, was preferable to false reassurance. At night, in unfamiliar rooms, he sat with his thoughts as he always had. The scale of responsibility had changed, but the process of reflection remained the same. He considered the nature of unity, the cost of division, the limits of power. He did not seek certainty where none existed. He sought steadiness. And so, standing at the threshold of a nation's unraveling, he did not rush forward or retreat inward. He remained present, grounded in the habits of thought that had shaped him from the beginning. The path ahead was obscured, but he stepped toward it with quiet resolve, carrying with him the understanding that leadership, like life itself, unfolded one deliberate moment at a time. The days following Abraham Lincoln's arrival in Washington settled into a careful rhythm, shaped by caution and reflection. The city itself felt like a place holding its breath. Conversations lowered when he entered a room. Glances lingered a moment too long. The streets carried a tension that did not announce itself loudly, but existed everywhere, like pressure before a storm. Lincoln noticed this not with alarm, but with a quiet attentiveness, as though he were listening to a distant sound still forming. His inauguration approached without celebration. The nation he was to lead was no longer whole, though its fractures were still uneven, uncertain. Several states had already chosen to leave the Union, while others hovered between decision and hesitation. Words such as loyalty and betrayal were spoken often, yet rarely defined. Lincoln understood that labels, once hardened, could close the door to understanding. He chose his language carefully, not to avoid truth, but to preserve space where dialogue might still breathe. When he delivered his inaugural address, his voice carried neither threat nor surrender. It carried restraint. He spoke of law, of unity, of bonds that had been formed slowly over time. He appealed not to fear, but to memory, not to force, but to conscience. Those listening heard different things within his words, shaped by their own hopes and anxieties. Lincoln accepted this. He knew that speech could invite reflection, but not command agreement. Soon after, the quiet tension gave way to open conflict. The sound of cannons at Fort Sumter marked the beginning of a war that had existed in feeling long before it existed in fact. When news reached Lincoln, he did not react with outward drama. He listened, absorbed, and then responded with the gravity the moment required. War, once begun, did not ask permission to grow. It expanded into every corner of thought and life. As Commander-in-Chief, Lincoln faced decisions that resisted simplicity. Each choice carried cost, often unseen at first. He called for troops, knowing that doing so would bring suffering to countless families. He felt the weight of this knowledge deeply. He did not speak of it often, but it lived within him, shaping the way he approached every report, every recommendation. He read casualty lists in silence, allowing the names to register as lives rather than numbers. The White House became a place of constant movement. Advisors came and went. Military leaders presented plans with confidence or urgency, sometimes both. Lincoln listened to them all, patient even when disagreement surfaced. He understood that certainty, when too quickly claimed, could blind judgment. He asked questions. He waited. He allowed time to clarify what haste might obscure. At night, when the corridors emptied and the lamps burned low, he walked alone. These quiet hours were essential to him. In solitude, he returned to the habits formed long ago, thinking slowly, weighing consequences, considering not only what could be done, but what should be done. He wrestled with doubt, not as an enemy, but as a companion that kept him alert to complexity. The war pressed inward as well as outward. Letters arrived daily from grieving parents, from wives and siblings, searching for meaning in loss. Lincoln read many of them himself. He replied when he could, his words shaped by empathy rather than protocol. He did not offer easy comfort. He acknowledged pain honestly, believing that recognition was a form of respect. Public criticism grew louder as the war continued. Some accused him of moving too slowly. Others believed he had already gone too far. Newspapers debated his character, his intelligence, his intentions. Lincoln was aware of these judgments, but he did not chase approval. He understood that leadership during fracture rarely felt reassuring. He remained focused on what he believed was essential, even when it isolated him. Within this storm, the question of slavery grew impossible to hold at a distance. It had always been present, a moral contradiction at the heart of the nation. Now it pressed forward, demanding resolution. Lincoln approached it with the same careful deliberation that defined his leadership. He weighed moral urgency against political reality, not to delay justice, but to ensure its endurance. When he finally issued the Emancipation Proclamation, It came not as a flourish, but as a measured act rooted in both conscience and necessity. He understood its limits. He knew it would not end suffering immediately. Yet he believed it marked a turning, a reorientation of purpose. Freedom, once named as a war aim, altered the moral landscape irrevocably. The burden of this decision did not lift his spirits. It deepened his seriousness. He carried the knowledge that words, once spoken, changed the shape of history, and that he would be held accountable not only by his contemporaries, but by those who would come long after. This awareness did not paralyze him. It humbled him. As the war dragged on, victories and losses arrived unevenly. Hope rose and fell. Lincoln learned to accept uncertainty as a constant companion. He did not allow success to soften his vigilance, nor failure to harden his resolve. He remained steady, returning again and again to the belief that the nation's survival depended not only on military outcome, but on moral coherence. In moments of exhaustion, he leaned into reflection rather than escape. He read poetry. He turned to scripture. He found in these texts not answers, but resonance, a reminder that others before him had grappled with suffering and responsibility. This connection across time offered quiet reassurance. Gradually, signs of an ending began to appear, though they were fragile and incomplete. The war's momentum shifted. The cost remained immense, but the possibility of resolution entered public consciousness. Lincoln did not celebrate this change. He prepared for what would follow, aware that peace carried its own challenges, its own demands for wisdom and restraint. As he looked toward a future not yet formed, his thoughts turned increasingly toward healing rather than victory. He imagined a nation that could endure its own scars without denying them. He knew this vision would require patience, humility, and a willingness to listen even after the cannons fell silent. And so, amid the noise of war and the quiet of his own thoughts, Abraham Lincoln continued forward, carrying the weight of the present while holding space for what might still be possible, allowing time, as always, to reveal the next step in its own unhurried way. As the long conflict stretched into its later years, Abraham Lincoln's inner world grew quieter, even as the outer world grew louder. The war had settled into a grim persistence, no longer shocking in its presence, yet never ordinary. Each day carried reports, figures, and decisions that required response. Lincoln met them with the same measured attention he had always given to complexity, but the accumulation of responsibility left its mark. His face grew more lined, his posture more stooped, yet his voice, when he spoke, retained its steady cadence. He learned to live with contradiction. Moments of military progress arrived alongside fresh sorrow. A victory on one front was often followed by loss on another. He understood that the war did not move in straight lines. It circled, returned, tested resolve repeatedly. Lincoln resisted the temptation to simplify its meaning. He allowed it to remain what it was, a human struggle marked by courage and fear, conviction and confusion. Within the White House, the atmosphere reflected this complexity. Advisors debated strategy with intensity. Generals arrived confident one week and uncertain the next. Lincoln listened without interruption, his hands often folded, his gaze thoughtful. He rarely raised his voice. When he disagreed, he did so gently, offering perspective rather than command. He believed that authority gained its strength not from volume, but from trust. His relationship with his generals was uneven. Some disappointed him through hesitation or pride. Others earned his respect through perseverance. He learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, how to discern capability beneath confidence. This process tested his patience, but it also refined his judgment. He became more willing to make difficult changes, more comfortable accepting responsibility for their consequences. Outside the corridors of power, ordinary people continued to write to him. Their letters arrived in uneven stacks, filled with hopes, grievances, and appeals. Lincoln read many late into the night, the lamplight casting soft shadows across the page. These words grounded him. They reminded him that the war was not an abstraction, but a lived reality shaping countless private lives. He responded when he could, often in language that carried empathy rather than certainty. Public opinion shifted constantly, influenced by news, rumor, and fatigue. Lincoln's leadership was questioned not only by opponents, but by allies who feared the cost of endurance. Calls for compromise rose and fell. Lincoln listened, reflected, and held to his course. He did not dismiss dissent. He understood that disagreement was a sign of engagement, a sign that people still cared deeply about the outcome. As his second election approached, uncertainty returned in familiar form. He did not assume re-election. He did not seek reassurance. He continued his work, believing that leadership required attention to the present rather than speculation about the future. When the election results confirmed his continuation in office, he accepted them quietly, aware that renewed trust also meant renewed obligation. His second inaugural address was shaped by years of observation and loss. He spoke of shared responsibility, of humility in the face of suffering. He did not claim moral superiority. He acknowledged complexity. His words carried a tone of reconciliation rather than triumph, suggesting that healing would require more than victory. They invited reflection rather than applause. As the war moved toward its conclusion, Lincoln's thoughts turned increasingly toward what would follow. He resisted language of punishment. He spoke instead of restoration, of binding wounds rather than deepening them. He believed that lasting peace required generosity, not erasure of memory, but an honest reckoning paired with restraint. Privately, he allowed himself moments of relief. though they were fleeting. The possibility of an end softened his thoughts, but did not lighten them entirely. He knew that the work of reconstruction would demand patience equal to that required by war. He prepared himself for this next phase with the same quiet seriousness that had guided him through every previous transition. In the evenings, when the noise of the day receded, he returned to solitude. He sat with the awareness that his own life had been shaped by forces larger than intention. That chance and circumstance had carried him to a place he never sought. This realization did not make him feel small. It made him attentive. He understood that leadership was not possession, but stewardship, held briefly and imperfectly. There were moments when he spoke of returning home, of resuming a quieter life. These thoughts were gentle, not urgent. He imagined walks unburdened by escort, conversations not weighted by consequence. These images did not distract him. They reminded him of what peace might feel like, grounding his efforts in something human and reachable. As spring approached, the city began to shift. The air softened. The sense of waiting eased slightly. People spoke more openly of hope, though cautiously. Lincoln moved among these changes with the same calm presence, aware that hope, like fear, required careful tending. He did not hurry toward conclusion. He allowed events to unfold, believing that rushing resolution could undo hard-won progress. His trust remained not in certainty, but in process, in the slow alignment of intention and action. And so, in the quiet moments between decision and rest, Abraham Lincoln continued to reflect, to listen, to hold complexity without turning away. The war's end drew nearer, but he remained present, attentive to the final responsibilities still before him, moving forward as he always had, one thoughtful moment at a time, letting the future arrive gently, without force. The final weeks of Abraham Lincoln's life unfolded with a quiet easing of tension. Though the weight he carried did not disappear, the war, at last, was drawing to a close. The sound of cannons faded from daily consciousness, replaced by cautious conversations about return and repair. The nation exhaled unevenly, unsure how to breathe without the constant pressure of conflict. Lincoln moved through these days with a gentleness that reflected both relief and deep fatigue. He spoke often now of reconciliation, not as an abstract hope, but as a practical necessity. He believed that peace could not be imposed in the same way war had been fought. It would need patience, humility, and a willingness to see former enemies as human rather than fixed symbols. He resisted calls for harsh measures. He worried that punishment might satisfy anger, but deepen wounds that would linger for generations. In meetings, his tone softened further. He listened carefully to differing visions of the future, weighing them with the same attentiveness he had given to wartime strategy. He did not imagine reconstruction as a single plan, but as an ongoing process that would require adjustment and care. He spoke of mercy not as weakness, but as strength disciplined by purpose. At home, the atmosphere lightened slightly. Mary sensed the shift and allowed herself moments of anticipation. The children, growing older, felt the change in subtler ways. Laughter returned more easily. The house, long heavy with unspoken fear, began to feel again like a place of ordinary life. Lincoln welcomed these moments quietly, aware of how fragile they were. He allowed himself to imagine the future more clearly now. He spoke of travel, of seeing places long delayed. He spoke of returning to Illinois, of resuming a simpler rhythm. These were not elaborate plans. They were gentle thoughts, held loosely, offering rest to a mind long burdened. He did not cling to them. He simply allowed them to exist. Public appearances continued, though his manner remained restrained. When crowds gathered, their relief and gratitude were evident. Lincoln acknowledged them without flourish. He understood that adulation could distort perspective. He remained focused on what still needed to be done, on the delicate work of transition that lay ahead. On the evening of April 14, 1865, he chose to step briefly into leisure. It was an unremarkable decision, shaped by a desire for normalcy rather than celebration. He sought a pause, a moment of shared experience outside the demands of office. Such moments had been rare, and he accepted this one without suspicion. What followed came swiftly and without warning. The details would later be recounted many times, shaped by shock and sorrow. In this telling, they remain quiet, because the meaning of that moment lies not in the act itself, but in its stillness afterward. Abraham Lincoln's life ended not in triumph or resolution, but in interruption, leaving behind a nation mid-breath. The hours that followed were filled with disbelief. The city fell into a hushed mourning that spread outward, carried by word and silence alike. People gathered instinctively, not knowing what else to do. Grief moved through streets and homes, across distances that had once felt insurmountable. It was not a loud grief. It was heavy and slow. Those who had known him personally spoke of his kindness, his patience, his willingness to listen. Those who had known him only through words felt a different kind of loss, as though a steady presence had been removed from the world. Even those who had opposed him sensed the gravity of what had passed. The conflict that had defined the era did not erase the shared recognition that something rare had been lost. In the days that followed, his body was carried slowly across the country he had served. Towns and cities paused to acknowledge his passing. People stood quietly, hats removed, eyes lowered. There were no demands in these moments, only recognition, only presence. The journey itself became a reflection of his life, moving steadily through familiar landscapes, allowing space for contemplation. As time continued, reflection replaced shock. Words spoken by Lincoln returned to public consciousness, read and reread with new understanding. His speeches, once debated for their caution, now revealed depth and foresight. People noticed the restraint, the humility, the care with which he had approached power. His leadership, defined by patience rather than force, gained clarity in absence. Yet his legacy did not settle into a single meaning. It remained layered, open to interpretation, shaped by the needs and questions of those who remembered him. Some saw in him a symbol of unity. Others saw endurance. Others saw a reminder that moral clarity often emerges slowly, through doubt and reflection rather than certainty. What endured most quietly was his manner of being, the way he listened, the way he allowed complexity without surrender, the way he carried responsibility without claiming infallibility. These qualities did not belong only to history. They continued to resonate, offering a model of leadership grounded in humanity rather than dominance. Over time, monuments would rise, books would be written, and his name would become fixed within national memory. Yet beneath these formal recognitions remained the image of a man shaped by ordinary beginnings, by loss and labor, by long hours of thought. A man who did not seek greatness, but accepted responsibility when it arrived. In the end, Abraham Lincoln's life did not conclude with a sense of completion, but with continuity. His influence moved forward through those who reflected on his words, who found in his example permission to be thoughtful in difficult times. He became part of an ongoing conversation about justice, unity, and the cost of care. And so, as the years passed and the world changed, his presence remained quietly felt, not as a demand, but as an invitation to pause, to listen, to move carefully through complexity without turning away. His story, like the night settling gently around a quiet fire, came to rest not in finality, but in calm remembrance, leaving behind a stillness in which reflection could continue, unhurried and enduring. Time did not hurry after Abraham Lincoln's passing. It moved with the same slow persistence that had shaped his life, allowing grief to soften into reflection. In homes, in schools, in quiet conversations between generations, his presence lingered not as a fixed image, but as a tone, a way of thinking that invited patience rather than certainty. The nation he left behind continued to struggle with the questions he had carried so carefully. Unity proved fragile. Freedom demanded more than proclamation. Reconstruction unfolded unevenly, shaped by hope, resistance, progress, and disappointment. Lincoln was no longer there to steady the pace, yet his influence moved quietly through the debates that followed. His words, once spoken into immediate circumstance, began to find new meaning in distance. People returned to his speeches not for instruction, but for orientation. They noticed the restraint, the absence of triumph. They heard a voice that acknowledged suffering without assigning simple blame. This voice did not offer ease. It offered companionship in complexity. Over time, that quality became increasingly rare and therefore increasingly valued. In classrooms, students learned his name alongside dates and events. Some saw him first as a figure carved in stone, tall and distant. Others encountered him through stories of childhood hardship, of self-education, of perseverance shaped more by reflection than ambition. Slowly, the image softened. He became less monument and more human, less symbol and more presence. Artists, writers, and thinkers returned to his life again and again, each finding something different. Some were drawn to his humor, subtle and grounding. Others to his melancholy, which never hardened into despair. Others still to his moral patience, his refusal to rush judgment, even when pressed by urgency. These interpretations did not cancel one another. They layered, much like the man himself. In quiet moments of national uncertainty, his example resurfaced. During periods of division, his words were quoted not as slogans, but as reminders. They suggested that leadership did not require certainty of outcome, only sincerity of effort. That strength could coexist with gentleness. That listening was not weakness, but discipline. Even beyond borders, his life resonated in distant places. People who had never walked the roads of Illinois or Washington found meaning in his steadiness. They recognized in him a universal human struggle, the effort to act justly within imperfect systems, to choose care over control. His story traveled, not because it promised resolution, but because it honored process. As generations passed, the urgency of his era faded, but the texture of his character remained relevant. New challenges arose, shaped by different technologies, different fears, different hopes. Yet the question of how to lead without losing one's humanity persisted. In this question, Lincoln's life continued to speak quietly. There were moments when his legacy was debated, reinterpreted, even contested. This too was part of continuity. He had never sought to close conversation. He had trusted that honest engagement, even when uncomfortable, was a sign of life. His example allowed room for disagreement without erasure, for critique without dismissal. In the stillness of reflection, one could imagine him as he often was, sitting alone with his thoughts, neither triumphant nor defeated, just present, just attentive, a man shaped by listening, by waiting, by allowing understanding to arrive slowly. This image endured because it felt attainable, human, grounded. As night settles in and the world grows quieter, his story rests not as a lesson to be memorized, but as a rhythm to be felt. A reminder that lives shaped by care leave echoes softer than noise, but deeper than force. That patience, once practiced, continues to move forward through time, even when its origin is long past. And so the story does not end in silence, but in a gentle continuity. His presence remains like a low, steady light, not illuminating everything at once, but enough to guide the next step, enough to invite reflection, enough to allow rest. In this quiet space, where thought slows and meaning unfolds without demand, Abraham Lincoln's life settles into memory, not as an ending, but as a calm and enduring companion, moving forward alongside those who continue to listen. In the years that followed, the quieter aspects of Abraham Lincoln's life began to rise gently to the surface of memory. As the immediacy of crisis faded, people found themselves returning not only to what he had done, but to how he had been. The texture of his presence, once overshadowed by urgency, became easier to notice in the calm that followed. There was a growing awareness that his leadership had not relied on force of personality, but on steadiness of attention. He had not attempted to dominate the moment. He had met it. This distinction, subtle yet profound, lingered in the collective consciousness. It suggested that influence could be exercised without urgency, that authority could rest in patience rather than pressure. Those who studied his life closely noticed how often he paused, how frequently he allowed silence to do its work. In a world that increasingly rewarded speed, this quality felt almost radical. Lincoln had trusted that understanding unfolded at its own pace, and that rushing clarity often distorted it. This trust, difficult to maintain, became part of his enduring appeal. In private letters and remembered conversations, a pattern emerged. He had asked questions not to challenge, but to understand. He had admitted uncertainty without retreating from responsibility. These habits, formed long before he held power, had carried him through its demands. They reminded others that character did not arise suddenly in moments of importance, but was shaped quietly over time. Communities that had once felt distant from one another found common ground in remembering him. His story crossed lines of belief and background because it did not demand agreement. It invited reflection. He had spoken in a way that left room for others to find themselves within his words. This openness allowed his memory to adapt, to remain relevant without becoming rigid, even in moments when his legacy was questioned or revised. There was a sense that such engagement honored him rather than diminished him. He had never sought to be beyond examination. He had welcomed scrutiny, believing that truth strengthened under honest attention. This willingness to be questioned became part of what people admired most. In quieter settings, away from public discourse, individuals reflected on what his life suggested about their own. They noticed how often he had chosen care over convenience, how he had resisted easy narratives in favor of honest complexity. These reflections did not inspire grand gestures. They encouraged small acts of patience, moments of listening, decisions shaped by humility. Over time, his image softened further. The sharp outlines of history blurred into something more human. He became less a figure standing apart and more a presence alongside. someone who had walked through uncertainty without demanding certainty from others, someone who had accepted the weight of responsibility without claiming mastery over it. This quality resonated, especially in moments of personal doubt. People found comfort in knowing that a life marked by hesitation and reflection could still shape history. That clarity did not require the absence of doubt, only the willingness to continue thoughtfully. Lincoln's life offered reassurance that seriousness need not exclude gentleness, that resolve could coexist with compassion. As generations continued to pass, his story became part of the quiet background of civic life, not always spoken aloud, but felt in expectations of fairness, in the value placed on restraint, in the belief that leadership should listen before it speaks. These influences moved invisibly, shaping culture without announcing themselves. In moments of stillness, one might imagine him, as he often was, leaning slightly forward, attentive present, not seeking to impress, but to understand. This image did not demand admiration. It invited imitation in the smallest, most human ways. A pause before speaking, a willingness to reconsider, a recognition of shared vulnerability. As night deepens and thoughts slow, his life continues to offer a gentle rhythm. Not a call to action, but a permission to be thoughtful, to accept complexity without fear, to move forward with care rather than certainty. In this way, Abraham Lincoln remains not a distant figure of the past, but a quiet companion in reflection. And so the story continues, not with new events, but with ongoing presence. A life that ended, yet did not conclude. A voice that grew silent, yet did not disappear. It settles now into the calm space where memory becomes understanding, where influence persists without effort, and where reflection can rest, unhurried, within the steady flow of time. Even as decades passed, the echo of Abraham Lincoln's life persisted softly. Woven into the patterns of daily existence, his story did not demand attention, yet it drew the quiet notice of those willing to look closely, to observe the rhythm of a life that had moved deliberately, carefully, and with consistent attention to what truly mattered. In towns and cities, in conversations that drifted from politics to memory, people recalled his patience, his steadiness, and the depth of his thought. The simplicity of his habits, once unremarkable, began to take on significance. He had read late into the night, walked alone, listened carefully, and spoken slowly. These gestures, small and human, carried meaning in retrospect. They suggested a way of being in the world that balanced action with reflection, presence with contemplation. His life became a quiet model for navigating complexity without hurry, for maintaining integrity without needing applause. Educators and storytellers found in him a source of calm instruction. They did not present him as flawless or unassailable, but as a companion through difficulty. His doubts, his hesitations, his moments of melancholy all became points of connection. People saw that even those entrusted with immense responsibility could remain human, attentive, and thoughtful. There was reassurance in this, a sense that wisdom was cultivated, not bestowed. As his speeches were studied, readers noticed the restraint that had characterized them. He rarely sought drama or provocation. Instead, he chose words that allowed ideas to settle into consciousness gently. He acknowledged suffering without dramatizing it. He offered direction without demanding obedience. These qualities, understated in their time, emerged gradually as the true measure of his presence. Art and literature continued to explore his life. Writers painted scenes of his childhood, his solitary reflection, his quiet humor, and the ways he carried sorrow without letting it define him entirely. Each interpretation highlighted different aspects, yet the underlying rhythm remained recognizable. A life shaped by observation, patience, and the persistent willingness to act carefully, even amid uncertainty. For ordinary people, his life offered a subtle guidance, not prescriptions for action, but examples of presence. It suggested that patience was itself a form of strength, that listening could be more powerful than speaking. That responsibility was carried best when acknowledged with humility and attention, rather than claimed with force. These lessons traveled quietly, taking root in small, often unnoticed ways. Even outside the sphere of politics and public life, Lincoln's manner continued to resonate. Parents told stories of his patience to children. Neighbors recalled his honesty to one another. These were not formal celebrations, but soft affirmations of a life that had moved carefully and meaningfully through the world. They reminded others that influence need not shout to be lasting. In moments of solitude, one could imagine him still, seated with papers, thinking long thoughts, allowing questions to linger without haste. He had carried doubt not as a weight to resist, but as a companion to guide him. His attention to human complexity, to moral nuance, and to the quiet demands of integrity remained his enduring presence. This presence did not require dramatization. It simply existed, steady and reflective. Across time, his life became a touchstone for those navigating uncertainty. People returned to his story when faced with hard choices or unclear paths. They did not seek to replicate his actions, but to embody the qualities he had shown: thoughtfulness, patience, empathy, and calm resilience. In this way, Lincoln's influence extended quietly, gently, across generations. Even now, in the stillness that follows remembrance, his story continues to settle into thought without urgency. It offers a rhythm to follow, not a destination to reach. His life, with all its reflection, care, and enduring steadiness, invites a slow inhalation of possibility, a recognition that meaningful presence is cultivated moment by moment. And so, long after the last speech, the last act, and the last day, Abraham Lincoln's story rests in the quiet. It lingers in memory, not as spectacle, but as a companion. A reminder that reflection, patience, and integrity persist quietly through time, shaping understanding and inviting contemplation, one slow, unhurried moment at a time. In the soft unfolding of history, Abraham Lincoln's life became less a series of events and more a pattern of presence. The outer details, dates, proclamations, battles, gradually receded, leaving the texture of his mind and character. People began to remember not only what he had done, but how he had carried himself through the weight of circumstance. The quiet steadiness with which he met uncertainty, loss, and responsibility. His humility became a point of reflection. He had been a man who understood the limits of his own knowledge, who acknowledged doubt without shrinking from duty. This willingness to live within uncertainty, rather than to conquer it, offered a quiet lesson that resonated far beyond his own time. It suggested that the measure of a life was not in acclaim or command, but in consistency, attention, and care. Even as generations grew distant from the events of his life, the sense of Lincoln as a steady presence persisted. Letters, memoirs, and recollections described a man who listened longer than he spoke, who allowed thought to unfold slowly, who approached each decision with a mixture of reason and empathy. This enduring image offered reassurance that seriousness need not harden into rigidity, and that responsibility could coexist with gentleness. In the quiet spaces of memory, people imagined him walking alone, reading late into the night, reflecting on the meaning of unity, freedom, and human consequence. These images were neither dramatic nor heroic in the conventional sense. They were ordinary, yet profound. Moments in which attention, thoughtfulness, and moral care quietly shaped a life of influence. His legacy moved softly through families, schools, and communities. Parents told children of his patience and integrity. Scholars and writers explored his choices and temperament, not only for historical insight, but for the human example they offered. His life became a companion in reflection, a presence that could be felt even without fanfare or ceremony. The qualities that had defined him, patience, listening, moral attentiveness, became points of subtle guidance. They encouraged quiet action, careful thought, and a recognition that progress was often slow, incremental, and imperfect. In this way, Lincoln's influence remained dynamic, though understated, shaping understanding without commanding it. Across decades, his story was revisited in different forms, yet the underlying rhythm endured. Even as society changed, the enduring impression was of a man who met difficulty with calm reflection, who allowed space for thought, who carried responsibility without arrogance. This constancy offered reassurance that human presence, exercised with care, could outlast circumstance. In private meditation, one could imagine him still sitting with his papers, considering questions that had no easy answer, listening to the voices of others, and feeling deeply the weight of human suffering without turning away. This image, gentle and persistent, served as a quiet touchstone for those seeking orientation amid uncertainty. As time stretched on, his life settled into memory, like a steady current beneath shifting waters. It did not demand attention, but offered itself quietly to those willing to notice. It suggested that endurance was cultivated moment by moment, that influence did not require spectacle, and that reflection could carry meaning beyond immediate circumstance. And so, Abraham Lincoln's story, moving through history and memory, rests not in the loudness of deeds, but in the calm persistence of presence. It continues to invite thought, reflection, and patience. It exists as a gentle companion, guiding understanding and encouraging quiet contemplation, allowing each listener or reader to carry a fragment of that steadiness forward, softly, slowly, and enduringly, into their own lives. In the long unfolding of time, the memory of Abraham Lincoln settled into a quieter, more contemplative rhythm. The immediacy of his life, the struggles, the decisions, the pressures of leadership softened in recollection, leaving the essence of a man who had moved through the world with attentiveness and care. He became less a figure of public spectacle and more a presence that could be felt, a subtle guide in thought and reflection. People began to notice the patterns that had defined him: his patience, his willingness to listen, his capacity to carry uncertainty without being undone. These qualities, once unnoticed amid the noise of urgent events, became central to understanding who he had been. They suggested that a life's value was measured not only by action, but by the manner in which one engaged with the complexities of existence, the depth with which one allowed thought and empathy to unfold. Even in generations far removed from the immediate context of his presidency, Lincoln's life offered a quiet model for navigating challenge. His steadiness suggested that presence itself could be influential. That moral attention was as important as achievement, and that careful thought, sustained over time, shaped outcomes more enduringly than rash decisions. In this way, his story continued to resonate, not as instruction, but as invitation to slow down, to reflect, to listen. Writers and historians, teachers and parents returned to his life for this human quality. They spoke of him as a man shaped by solitude and reflection, a man who had met grief without bitterness, who had carried responsibility without seeking recognition, who had moved deliberately even amid turbulence. These narratives did not dramatize or elevate. They allowed the ordinary, enduring qualities of character to emerge softly into view. In quiet moments of imagination, one could see him walking along paths long familiar, seated at a desk with papers and books, pausing in thought, observing the world with gentle attentiveness. He had learned to live with uncertainty, to wait for understanding, to meet each moment fully without attempting to control what was yet unseen. This image persisted, not as an idol to admire, but as a companion in thought, offering calm reassurance that reflection is itself a form of guidance. Across communities and time, his influence moved subtly. People who never knew him personally felt the effect of his approach to life, the value of patience, the importance of listening, the possibility of moral presence even in the face of complex, sometimes overwhelming circumstance. These echoes did not demand action, but they encouraged thoughtfulness, shaping the character of those who engaged with his story. Even as public discourse shifted and new challenges arose for the nation, Lincoln's life remained a reference point for integrity in attention. He was remembered not for spectacle, but for the quiet consistency with which he carried responsibility, for the human depth with which he approached leadership, for the gentleness with which he allowed humanity to exist even amid great strain. Time allowed his story to settle like a calm river after a storm, smooth and steady beneath a changing surface. His life became less about historical events and more about the qualities that had defined him: patience, reflection, moral care, and the quiet courage to meet difficulty without retreating into fear or arrogance. These qualities endured because they were human, attainable, and grounded in observation of life itself. And so, in the stillness of remembrance, Abraham Lincoln continues to offer a presence, subtle and sustaining, not as a figure to be idolized, but as a companion in contemplation. His life moves gently through memory, inviting reflection, encouraging patience, and offering a steady rhythm for those willing to slow their own thoughts and inhabit the quiet, enduring qualities he exemplified. It is in this enduring calm, carried softly forward, that his story finds its quiet continuation. Over the decades, the quiet presence of Abraham Lincoln deepened in collective memory. His life, once measured by the immediacy of crises and decisions, came to be understood through the steady cadence of his thought, the gentleness of his attention, and the care with which he moved through responsibility. People recalled him not as a figure of spectacle, but as a companion to reflection, someone whose life suggested the possibility of moving deliberately through uncertainty. The ordinary details of his existence, the walks he took alone, the books he read late into the night, the letters he pondered carefully, became as meaningful as the grander acts of leadership. These were the moments in which his character quietly revealed itself. They reminded others that influence does not require command, and that presence can be more enduring than achievement. Even as historical narratives shifted and generations changed, the essence of his life remained. Teachers spoke of him not only as a president, but as a human being shaped by work, loss, contemplation, and persistence. Writers explored the rhythms of his thought, his patience in listening, his willingness to live with doubt without turning away from duty. In every retelling, the same quiet truths emerge: attentiveness, humility, and the deep awareness of human consequence. For those seeking guidance amid uncertainty, his life offered a soft but reliable reference. It suggested that enduring influence is found in reflection, in measured decisions, in the consistent choice to consider others and to act with care. Lincoln's story encouraged a form of courage that did not shout, but persisted steadily, unbroken by the need for immediate recognition or applause. Even far beyond the places he had lived and the nation he had led, his example traveled. People recognized in him a universal struggle: how to carry responsibility gracefully, how to engage with complexity without avoidance, how to meet sorrow and uncertainty without surrender. His presence, though absent from the world of the living, continued to resonate quietly, shaping thought and behavior in subtle ways. In imagination, he remained visible as a figure of calm attentiveness, seated with papers, walking alone, pausing in contemplation. He embodied the possibility of endurance without hardening, of moral attention without aggression, of leadership guided by patience rather than urgency. These qualities, quietly sustained, offered comfort and direction without demand. As history moved forward, his story became a part of the background of culture, a subtle rhythm threading through collective consciousness. People returned to it when seeking reassurance, when facing complexity, or when simply needing a model of deliberate, careful thought. In this way, his life continued to guide, not through command or spectacle, but through the gentle persistence of example. The passage of years softened the sharpness of public memory, yet the essence of Lincoln's character remained steady, reflective, humane. His story no longer required the immediacy of events to carry significance. It existed as a presence, a tone, a rhythm that could be revisited slowly, again and again, offering reflection without strain, understanding without pressure. And so, Abraham Lincoln's life rests in history, not as a dramatic arc, but as a calm companion to thought. It moves softly through memory, offering patience, moral attentiveness, and steady reflection. It invites the listener to slow, to consider, and to carry forward the quiet persistence of presence, allowing each moment to unfold gently into the next, unhurried and enduring, a constant thread through the quiet continuity of human experience. Even as the decades continued to pass, Abraham Lincoln's presence lingered quietly in the spaces between events, in the pause of reflection, in the steady unfolding of memory. His life, once defined by public responsibility and the pressures of leadership, became a quiet companion to thought, a source of calm for those who returned to it in moments of contemplation. People discovered, over time, that his influence endured not through spectacle, but through the subtleties of his manner, his patience, and his attentiveness to the human heart. The habits that had shaped him, reading deeply, listening fully, reflecting slowly, came to be seen as central to his enduring resonance. These were not the dramatic gestures of power, but the quiet acts that allowed a life to navigate complexity without losing touch with humanity. They reminded others that careful attention, moral awareness, and the courage to act fully could be as consequential as any visible triumph. Generations found in him an example of how presence matters more than proclamation. His steadiness offered reassurance in times of uncertainty, a model for engaging with difficulty without haste, for meeting responsibility without the need for immediate recognition. The qualities that had sustained him in life continued to offer guidance: humility, patience, empathy, and a willingness to allow thought to unfold before action. Stories of his life, retold across families, schools, and communities, emphasized these quiet strengths. People recalled him not only as a president or a historical figure, but as a human being who had carried doubt and sorrow without relinquishing care. His humor, his melancholy, his attentiveness, all became threads in a tapestry that suggested a form of wisdom accessible to ordinary lives. Even as the world changed around him, his story remained relevant. In moments of personal reflection, individuals imagined him walking slowly, sitting alone, considering questions without demand for immediate answers. They found in this imagined presence a reminder that clarity often comes gradually, that moral attention is cultivated over time, and that steady engagement can quietly shape outcomes beyond immediate perception. The influence of his life moved subtly through society. It shaped ideas of leadership, but also ideas of character, of the value of listening, of the strength in pausing, of the patience required to navigate uncertainty. These lessons were felt more than they were spoken, integrated into habits of thought and approaches to life without overt ceremony or instruction. Art, literature, and public memory continued to revisit him, yet the underlying rhythm remained unchanged. He was remembered for his attentiveness, his quiet reflection, and his ability to carry immense responsibility without letting it harden his humanity. These qualities persisted because they were grounded in the ordinary, yet elevated through the consistency of their practice. Even in the quietest contemplation, one could imagine him as he had been: thoughtful, steady, and present. He had moved through the turbulence of his era with attention and care, and this very manner became his lasting legacy. It offered a gentle guidance, a quiet reassurance, and a model for living fully and attentively, even when the world demands speed, certainty, or spectacle. And so, Abraham Lincoln's story continues to exist not as an ending, but as a rhythm. It moves softly through memory, shaping reflection and inviting patience. It is present in the moments when thought slows, when attention turns inward, and when moral awareness is exercised with care. His life rests not in grand finale, but in enduring presence, a steady companion for reflection, quietly guiding unhurried and enduring through time. In the long quiet of history, Abraham Lincoln's life settled into a gentle rhythm of remembrance. The events of his time, the speeches, the decisions, and the moments of crisis slowly gave way to the impression of a man defined more by presence than by spectacle. People came to remember him not only for what he accomplished, but for the manner in which he moved through life, with attentiveness, with care, and with a patience that allowed thought and conscience to guide him steadily. His personal qualities, the quiet reflection, the deliberate consideration, the moral attentiveness, became the lens through which his story endured. They were not qualities easily measured by achievement, but by resonance. They shaped how generations understood responsibility, humility, and the slow work of influence. In recalling him, people felt the possibility of acting thoughtfully, of living carefully, and of meeting life's uncertainties without haste. Lincoln's life offered a model of endurance that was neither rigid nor performative. He had carried doubt and grief without letting them harden into despair. He had exercised authority without domination, influence without insistence. These patterns of being, once ordinary and easily overlooked, became profound in their subtlety, teaching that lasting presence is often quiet, steady, and sustained through attention rather than assertion. Even in the imagining of private moments, he remained a figure of calm contemplation, seated with books and letters, walking alone through familiar spaces, pausing to consider questions that had no simple answers. In these images, he offered a companionable example of a life shaped by reflection, patience, and an openness to complexity. It was a model that invited no rush, no forced resolution, only the gentle unfolding of thought and care. Generations found in him an enduring companion for reflection. His life suggested that the slow cultivation of character, attentiveness, and moral presence could quietly shape events and human understanding. He became a touchstone not for spectacle or dramatization, but for the subtle, persistent work of navigating the world with integrity. This influence moved softly through homes, schools, communities, and private thought, shaping understanding without demand. Time continued to soften the sharp edges of memory, allowing the essence of his life to persist as a quiet presence. People returned to his story in moments of uncertainty, drawing reassurance from the steadiness of his character and the attentiveness of his mind. In this way, Lincoln's life offered a rhythm of calm reflection, reminding others that patience, thoughtfulness, and moral care endure longer than urgency or command. Even as society changed, his example remained relevant. The qualities he exemplified, humility, attentiveness, patience, empathy, offered guidance without assertion, a model for moving through complexity with quiet awareness. His life became less about historical events and more about the presence. He embodied a steady, reflective, humane rhythm that could be felt even across generations and distance. And so, Abraham Lincoln's story rests now not as a sequence of dramatic moments, but as a sustained, calm presence in memory. It continues to offer guidance to those who seek reflection, patience, and careful attention. His life endures in the quiet moments of thought, in the steady unfolding of understanding, and in the persistent, unhurried rhythm of reflection, quietly shaping hearts and minds, softly, steadily, and enduringly. Over the long passage of years, Abraham Lincoln's presence settled into the quiet fabric of collective memory, becoming less about events and more about the essence of who he was. His life, once shaped by immediate pressures and weighty responsibilities, came to be remembered for the way he navigated complexity with patience and attentiveness. People recalled him not only for his actions, but for the manner in which he met each moment. With careful thought, deep listening, and a steady calm that seemed to move more slowly than the world around him, the ordinary rhythms of his daily life, the reading by lamplight, the walks taken in solitude, the pauses to consider letters and counsel, emerged as markers of enduring significance. They suggested that the cultivation of thought, the discipline of attention, and the gentle care of conscience could quietly shape a life of influence. These were not grand gestures, but subtle movements, repeated over years, that allowed presence and understanding to grow steadily. Even as generations changed, Lincoln's life offered a companionable model for facing uncertainty. His patience, his capacity to sit with doubt without fleeing, and his moral attentiveness became lessons felt more than spoken. People returned to his story in moments of reflection, drawing reassurance from the quiet example of a life lived carefully, deliberately, and with awareness of both human frailty and potential. Writers, historians, and storytellers found in him a subject whose depth could be explored endlessly, without ever exhausting the calm it offered. They traced his attentiveness to human complexity, his humility in authority, and the thoughtfulness that guided his decisions. In these explorations, he was not an unreachable icon, but a figure whose steadiness could be quietly observed and quietly emulated. Even when the world changed in ways he could not have imagined, the qualities that defined him endured. His life suggested that leadership does not require loud proclamation, that moral clarity emerges from reflection rather than assertion, and that influence can persist without spectacle. These lessons traveled softly through homes, classrooms, and communities, shaping thought and character without demanding attention. In imagining him privately, one could see him still seated, thoughtful, quiet, attentive. He had learned to meet difficulty without surrender, to act with deliberation, and to maintain presence even amid turbulence. These qualities, subtle and persistent, became the most enduring parts of his story, offering guidance for navigating both personal and collective uncertainty. Time allowed the contours of his life to be understood less as a timeline of events and more as a rhythm of being. Deliberate, reflective, human. His life became a companion in thought, a presence that encouraged careful attention, patience, and moral awareness. It suggested that the quiet cultivation of character could ripple outward, shaping understanding and influence across generations. And so, Abraham Lincoln's story continues to rest in memory, not as a dramatic narrative, but as a gentle, enduring presence. It moves softly through time, offering reflection and calm, inviting patience and attentiveness, and reminding those who pause to remember that influence is often quiet, steadfast, and shaped by the care we bring to each unfolding moment. In the quiet sweep of time, Abraham Lincoln's life settles softly into reflection. The immediacy of events, the pressures of leadership, and the weight of the nation he carried gradually fade into memory, leaving the essence of a man whose presence endured through attentiveness, patience, and care. He is remembered not for spectacle or triumph, but for the way he moved deliberately through uncertainty, meeting each moment with thoughtfulness and quiet moral courage. His story lives on in the gentle rhythm of his actions. Reading by lamplight, walking alone, listening carefully, pausing to reflect before speaking. These ordinary moments, repeated over a lifetime, reveal the depth of a life, shaped not by haste or assertion, but by patience, reflection, and steady presence. They remind those who consider them that influence often flows quietly, shaped by thought and character, rather than by noise or force. Generations have returned to his life for guidance, finding in his steadiness a companion in contemplation, his willingness to carry doubt without surrender, to engage complexity without retreat, and to act with care without seeking acclaim, offers reassurance that living thoughtfully matters more than fleeting recognition. His example persists in the rhythms of reflection, patience, and moral attentiveness, guiding quietly through the slow passage of time. Even as society changed, his life continued to resonate because it embodies a calm constancy. He had shown that leadership is not measured only by decisions or victories, but by the manner in which one inhabits responsibility, by the care one takes in listening, and by the human attention given to others. These qualities endure precisely because they are subtle, persistent, and attainable. In imagination, he remains a figure of quiet reflection, seated at his desk, walking through familiar paths, considering questions without urgency, listening with openness. These images are not distant or untouchable. They are a model of human attentiveness and patience, a companion to thought and meditation, offering a steady rhythm for those willing to pause and follow it. Abraham Lincoln's life, in its quiet persistence, becomes more than history. It becomes presence. It continues softly in memory, in reflection, in the gentle shaping of understanding. It rests not in finality, but in ongoing influence, offering reassurance that lives guided by thoughtfulness, care, and patience leave enduring echoes. And so, as the world continues its slow unfolding, his story remains, quietly inviting contemplation, gently guiding reflection, and resting in the steady, calm presence that continues to endure softly through time.